Order the Oconee County Board of Zoning Appeals this Monday, March 15th. And the first item of business is to review the minutes, and just one comment on that. From the last minutes, there was an error in terms of Mr. Morgan and Mr. Lusk, their names reversed, and I understand that you've corrected those minutes, but we just haven't seen the minutes. So if there is a motion to approve the minutes, you may want to make that subject to the change of interchanging those two names in the minutes. Right. So are there any comments about the minutes? Any suggested changes or anything? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Subject to?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes subject to the name change from Lusk to Morgan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passed. Minutes passed. Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comment for non-agenda items. Is there anybody that wants to speak on a topic other than what we're covering tonight? If not, then move on to the next item, which is staff update. And I guess you were going to cover a couple items.
Well, primarily just Chairman, you're well aware of this, of course, that yesterday the ad hoc committee that was looking at the board notification process, that is the process of notifying the public concerning board cases and whether or not we needed to strengthen that process, completed its work, and the recommendations that are coming from that committee I believe we're sending on to the Planning and Economic Development Committee of Council to review, and if they're comfortable with that, then I assume they will pass them along to Planning Commission to send them on through the process. Basically, this would involve text amendments to the code to somewhat strengthen the notification standards that we use to notify the public, and so that's where we are on that now.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that you wanted to cover?
I think that's it.
So the next item on the agenda is the hearing of the variance application itself. And let me read that item. It's application VA 18-2, Bounty Line Enterprises Incorporated is requesting a variance from section 32-214B and from the setback requirements of the Oconee County Zoning Ordinance for structures to allow underground storage tanks and a portion of new parking aisles and curbs to intrude by up to 12.5 feet into the front setback area for new commercial use. The variance is associated with a proposed commercial use at the intersection of Edenboro Way and West Cherry Road in the Seneca area, TMS number 271-01-01-149. Okay, so would you like to give a statement of matter before the board?
Yes, I think you'll note from the staff report, I believe is on the last 2 pages of your packet, and what we pointed out there was that this request was for a variance that you've mentioned for involving setbacks. The reason is that this is a request for, or at least the applicant's planning to put a convenience store gas station at this location at Edinburgh and Cherry Road, and of course that's right in front of, or one of the entrances to the piers and the student housing complex, and there is the need for an underground storage tank to go in an area in front of the building that will be within the what's called the setback area, the 25-foot setback area for development in a control-free district from the front property line. There's that, and there's also some of the paved area for the driveways and parking areas on the site that would intrude into that 25-foot setback area. The ruling by the staff by the zoning administrator was that those counted as structures that would have to meet the setback requirements. that even though they're not primarily vertical structures above ground, the way the code is written, the way the definition is written, it would suggest that any such structure would need to comply with that requirement. Since there is some confusion and some concern about whether or not the language, whether or not the intent of the language was to require that kind of setback of underground structures and uses that were not above ground, or at least were for example, paved surfaces on the ground. We may consider at some point trying to make a recommendation to do a text amendment on that issue to try to clarify the intent of that setback provision. But in the current case, what you have is a request based on the standards, the criteria that, as you know, that the applicant has to meet in order to be approved for a variance request. And those criteria in this case seem to apply, because if you look at the plan on your screen or in your packet that shows you the site, you'll see that it's got that triangular shape, and you've got the old railroad right-of-way bed to the south, and then of course it's at that corner that we discussed. As a result, it's kind of squeezed there. It's a tight fit for this kind of layout, and it forces, you know, the tanks are forced to the front. They need to be further away anyway, and they're forced to the front here and on into the right-of-way area, as well as some of that paved surface area. So as you know, when you look at the criteria for a variance, those 4 or 5 items, 4 items really that are key to that, section 38.-7.1, extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the property. That's one of the issues here. Conditions here that don't generally apply to other property in the area. So again, it's a rather, you know, unusual shape and unusual situation that they have with this property. And because of these conditions, these conditions would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property in terms of meeting those standards. And then there's also the issue of the variance not having a substantial detriment to adjacent uses or to the public good. That's one of, as you know, one of the criteria that the applicant has to meet. The character of the area, that sort of thing. This is a fairly subtle request in terms of its impact, as you can tell from this being structures essentially on the ground or under the ground. So that seems to apply in that situation as well, or in that case with that particular criteria. So that's the staff input on this, and the request is to allow a variance up to, I think, about 12.5 feet into that setback area for this current layout to be realized. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So the process from here is that the applicant would have about 5 minutes to speak about why they're requesting the variance. Then staff will have a chance to comment back again if they would like to clarify items. Then the opposition would have a chance to speak for 5 minutes. Then there would be an opportunity for the applicant to have a rebuttal to what in the opposition that might have spoken. And then we have unsworn public comment and then questions from the board. So that's kind of the process of going through this. So the next step is the applicant gets to talk about why you'd like to have this request approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals. So if you go to the microphone and just give your name and just the name, is that all they need to do? Just the name? Okay.
Jamie Turner. I work with J.W. White Consulting, and of course, David Land is our client. A couple of reasons, or a couple of things to add to what you mentioned. You know, because of like I said, the shape of the property, and there's a railroad right of way that we have to deal with. We are already as close to that as possible, and you know, so we can't really push the site down any more than it is. The biggest concern is really a safety concern. The reason the tank, we've got that little area And I wish I could see the plans while I'm looking at them, but anyway, we got an area up there where that tank is. You know, we want to get that out of the drive aisle for safety reasons. You know, so that's another reason why that little area is jetted out into the setback. So that's really the two reasons. We don't really have room based on the site to pull it down, and we don't want that storage tank inside the drive aisle. And you know, in the way that, I don't know, I guess that's why we're getting this variance. We interpret that rule differently because we don't really consider this vertical structure. I mean, I know in Anderson County, Greenwood County, Pickens, I mean, I've worked on all of them for years, and we've always been able to put, you know, a curbing pavement inside of a setback. Now, if there's a landscape buffer, that's different, which in this case, Oconee doesn't have any. So I guess that's why we questioned the setback, because we don't consider that vertical structure. Anyway, anybody have any questions for me?
No,
right.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does staff have anything in addition to say on that?
No, Mr. Chairman, that sums up the issues that we found as well. I think the interpretation is a question, and that's why, as I mentioned before, we'd like to perhaps look at a text amendment to the ordinance just to clarify that, because it is true that my experience has been that in most cases those kinds of that kind of construction, building, whatever that's either on or below ground, aren't normally incorporated in the setback issue unless you do have some other requirement for buffers or something to that effect. But in our code, it's a little fuzzy and unclear and suggests that they are, which I don't think necessarily was the intent, but we need to clarify that language. So I think we can, in the future, could probably address it that way so that we don't encounter that again.
As I understand, the only thing that'll be above ground will be the curbing,
I believe that's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
and we find curbing in setbacks, right-of-ways, and everything else.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, so the next step is there anybody who wants to speak in opposition to the variance request? Okay, hearing none. Obviously, there isn't need for a rebuttal for the applicant because there's nobody to rebut. And any unsworn comment, any from public? Yes, Jim?
My name is Jim Codner. Just listening to the discussion here, I'm certainly in favor of the request. I think Mr. Land has a very, very good project, and I'd recommend approval. But concerning the process, I can foresee circumstances where underground tanks next to some property I own that, you know, I don't expect underground tanks to be right next to my property line, or curbing or whatever. I think this still ought to require a variance request. If someone wants to put an underground tank, maybe a propane tank or a gas tank, put that not within the setback, but right next to my property line, I might have an issue with that. And so it seems right to me to consider these as vertical encroachments, or even curbing. There could be situations where, yeah, I really don't want my neighbor to put curbing right up next to my property line or closer to my property line than I might expect. And so that would make it subject to a variance request. And you might very well approve it, even over my objections, but at least you have the process. So if it's your input or staff's input, but that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, are there any items that we want to discuss as a board?
Well, what I see here is we've got a tank that's gonna be underground. Tanks are underground everywhere. You'll be able to drive across and do anything like that and all. It's not a vertical structure in any way. Curbing should not be considered a vertical structure because we have curbing in right-of-ways and everything else in this county and all like that. And there's nothing that's a vertical structure here. Now, I have not read the ordinance that pertains to this vertical structure thing, and, but, you know, I don't see that it's, I really would like to know what the tank's gonna be on this picture up here. Come on to this point here.
It's right out of reach.
You see how you got the gray hatching and you got the
Yeah.
two arrows? It's that area right above there that's in, it shows it's concrete.
What's right behind it? Is that a road behind it? Oh, is that
That's Cherry Road.
That's Cherry Road, okay.
And there's a,
And you're not encroaching in any way on the right of way?
no, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, the right of way is here, and we're still,
It's
we're
probably
still.
32 feet from the center line in this road.
It was 100-foot right of way, so, 50 feet from the center line.
And I mean, that's just, that's just my opinion of, I have not read the ordinance on the vertical structure exactly the way it's written.
If it would help, Mr. Chairman, I know, everybody hasn't read that section, but it's probably, for years, people probably didn't read it, someone encountered it. The definition of structure in the ordinance and the code is anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires location in or on the land, or attachment to something having a permanent location in or on the land. So,
Pretty broad.
the language is a little, it's all-inclusive. So, we'll look at that.
Okay. Are there any other discussions or comments that you would like to make? So we have, as you know, we have two ways that we can vote for this. We can vote for all four together, or we can vote for one individually. I think I would entertain a motion for either one of the two directions, depending on the preferences of the board.
Mr. Chair, in light of this situation, I think we're pretty much all in agreement, it sounds like, that this isn't in the vertical structure, anything is kind of pretty cut and dry. I would make a motion that we do all four at once instead of going individually.
Okay. Is there a second? Second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, motion carried. So we'll treat them all as one. So I will read them. So we're looking for a motion to state that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property, that these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. Because of these conditions, the application of this chapter to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. The authorization of a variance will not be a substantial detriment to adjacent uses or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. Can I hear a motion to the affirmative to accept these conditions? Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Now, as I understand, Bill, we would like a little more explanation as to why for the vote. Do we need to have any discussion on that, or?
I think the motion, it would probably be helpful in the motion for just to reference the criteria and why you feel like it at least meets it. But I think we focused on in discussion on the character of the property. You know, its shape and its relationship to the surrounding structures and right-of-ways and all of that, and how that causes it to meet these standards.
Would you be willing to make an amendment to your motion to add some of the rationale as, just for clarification if you could make an amendment, a request for amending your motion?
Yes, I looked at him in that motion. Who died when Mr. Logan's on?
Okay, is there a second to the request for amendment?
I'll say.
Okay, all in favor, raise your right hand. All right, thank you. Okay, so that's passed.
I do need to have you sign the
Right.
board order so we can pass that along to the applicant.
I'll be the first night.
The-
Well, for some of them, it's their second home.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is old business. Is there any old business to come before the board? Hearing none, is there any new business to come before the board? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Any second?
I'll second it if you made the motion.
Motion, all in favor, raise your right hand. Meeting adjourned.
It was a quick one.
That's the
Yeah, thank you.
plan.
You all right there? Yes, up at Congress, yes, been, yes, I've been up there. I ain't seen you forever. You been hiding. You finally got off the planning commission.
Y'all have a good week.
All right, thank you.
On the borders on the field, I mean,